Okay. Well, good morning and good afternoon to everyone, and welcome to the second webinar of a two-part series on financial sustainability models for private land conservation in Latin America. To achieve the global conservation goals set by the international community, there is an enormous consensus of the growing need to expand conservation finance opportunities for private and civic land conservation worldwide. And Latin America is no exception, both in terms of financing the establishment of privately protected and conserved areas and ensuring their financial sustainability. In the first webinar in this series, panelists explored the financial mechanisms used around the world to fund private land conservation efforts and their relevance and limitations in the Latin American context. In this second follow-up webinar, panelists will focus on the financial sustainability strategies or models for existing private land conservation initiatives. Since conservation alone is not enough to financially sustain the private reserves initiatives for most landowners, a discussion on the effectiveness of various financing models for PPAs, including subsidies, tax incentives, donations, payment for ecosystem services, volunteering programs, nature tourism or ecotourism, organic agriculture, holistic livestock farming, or other alternative sustainable business models becomes relevant. This webinar will explore the existence of these instruments that support PPAs and discuss their benefits and limitations. To address these issues, we have a panel of 4 guests. Samuel Valdez, Director of Biodiversity Consultant Group from Panama, Javier Beltran, Conservation Director of TNC in Argentina, Juan Celada, Technical Director of the Association of Private Natural Reserves of Guatemala, and Roberto Peralta, lawyer and founder of Peralta Associates, a law firm from Chile. Our first guest is Samuel Valdez from Panama. He's director of the Biodiversity Consultant Group, has a degree in biology from the University of Panama, with an MBA in marketing from the Inter-American University. He has more than 20 years of experience in the field of environmental management, leading and participating in numerous projects at the national and international level for public and private protected areas, as well as the nomination of World Heritage Sites. He has been a consultant for organizations as the Ministry of Environment and WWF. In addition, he published several scientific articles and books on the ecology and biodiversity of Panama. From 2019 to 2024, he was president of the Network of Private Natural Reserves of Panama. Samuel, you have the floor.
Thank you, Hernan. Thank you all. So, well, basically, we will continue the discussion from the past meeting. Let me start sharing my screen and confirm you are able to see it. It's okay?
Yes, it's great. Thank you.
Okay, well, this is the continuation, as we can see before. Really, there are good examples of sustainable support or economical support from different models to payment for ecosystem services. But what happens when there is not that support? What happens when conservation is not financed by environmental service payment support or other models of financing? So this is the Panama case study. This is something that I want to show you today. What happened in this context? Well, Panama voluntary conservation efforts in Panama are close to 51 different initiatives dispersed around the country. You can see there's some clusters of privately or voluntary conservation efforts in Panama that altogether sum around 35,000 hectares around the country. Most of them are closer to protected areas in these areas, and other ones work as a stepping stone between protected areas. And some of them are more isolated and protect critical environments or critical habitats for protected species outside of the protected area network. So basically, after a search and a research on what are the financing sources for management and protection of these 51 private protected or voluntary conservation efforts in Panama, more than 60% of financing of management came from owner fund, personal resources dedicated to conservation of nature. In some cases, this economical support, personal support, came with other activities like ecotourism, forestry resources 2%, ecotourism 10%, and donations. Others include corporate financing. Let's say that this is when the protected area, the privately protected areas, is owned by a company or a big GNO that have resources, corporate resources, to protect it and to preserve these and manage these areas. But most case is from owner fund and personal resources or family resources. So in maybe 5 years ago, we received the first government support from Panama support to understand and to create a management and strategic plan for the association of for the network of private protected areas in Panama. And thanks to this support from Panama government, we can develop a strategic plan that identifies opportunities for conservation, how to finance conservation. And we develop 12 management plans as a pilot plan for 12 privately owned protected areas in Panama, and make a zonification, how to use the land, and what make also a characterization, so which biodiversity values are inside these areas, and how to manage them, or what is the financial gap needed to manage, to make some research, to make some protection. So, well, after this 12 initiative of plans for management, we identified activity for financial sustainability actually happening in some areas, and other are opportunities to develop inside these areas. Ecotourism is the first one, is the classic, let's say the classic way to support and to financially support conservation activities. Agrotourism, commercial reforestation, let's say the transformation of pastures and lands to forest to get wood, sustainable agriculture, sustainable cocoa and coffee, and something that I want to show you is the opportunities of biocommerce, and this is a personal initiative to help to finance conservation in some cases. Let's say butterflies, stingless, native bees, honey, and non-timber forest products. So also, based on this, the first thing we have to identify is how much money we need to protect these private protected areas. What's the gap? How much money we need? So I make this graphic based on these plans identified as a budget needed to protection, to research, and just to preserve these lands. And this is the graphic that I get from these scenarios. As we can see, it's not a linear line. So this is the areas in hectares, and this is US dollars per hectare per year needed to protect the land. this, let's say this is patrolling, this is signaling or protection, and it does not include other programs as, let's say, research programs, does not include research or let's say other thing that just protection. No agriculture, not ecotourism. It's just what is a baseline, the minimum that you need to pay a ranger or somebody that patrol the area and install some protection signaling around the protected area, the privately protected area. And as you can see, when there is after 300 hectares, it start to decrease the quantity of money needed around to $50 per hectare per year, but small reserve need higher quantities. This is because the relation of the surface and resources needed is not linear. So this is an idea of the gap. So this gives us an idea of how much is needed to protect these lands. So as a context, I want to show for a reference the Panama budget for public protected areas. And I think it's ridiculous. It's about 27 cents and $1.9 per hectare per year. And this is based on the official web page, where this is the budget for SINAP. This is the System for Protected Areas of Panama. This is the budget of the last 4 years, the average budget, and the terrestrial protected area and marine protected area. And what, in terms of percentage, what does it mean from the Ministerio Ambiente budget? So close to 34%, 35% of the budget is for protected areas in Panama, public protected areas. If we take in account only terrestrial surface, only terrestrial area is close to $2 per hectare per year. And if we include the marine protected area, it goes to 25 cents per hectare per year. So this to take in account is a context. So what actually is doing to financing ecotourism activities in Panama? So one of the better examples in Panama is Canopy Camp, who developed a great project of bird watching installing some glamping areas, some glamping operation into their privately protected area, close to a protected, public protected area. And where Canopy Camp have developed a very good projection, international projection. People goes to this area to watch birds, and in that way it helps to support the protection of the primarily protected forest. And as you can see, this is from yesterday, the Canopy Camp bird register more than 400 species and more than 3,000 lists. People that develop lists in this area, and 700 birders that visit this area. So this is show us the relevance of this area in terms of how is the bird watching may help to protect, may help to support and give some financial support to these efforts. And also, this is a personal experience I want to show you, because I think that it's more than, this is an experiment, let's say, that I'm preparing from a few years ago. I own 2 protected areas, Estación Biológica Jujuna, but Jujuna means is a nocturnal monkey, and people fear because think that it's like a demon, nocturnal demon. Well, we try to give a better image this monkey through this biological station and privately protected area, las oropéndolas. Oropéndola is a bird, nesting bird that create hanging nest in trees. So what we start to do a few years ago, we want to support research inside this area. So together with BioFuture, is a small organization of young biologists, we developed new phases of the science. It's a research program that helps students, thesis students from biology, to make the research into these privately protected areas. After they present their thesis, some results, let's say the inventory of birds, inventory of frogs, inventories, whatever they research, and we transform together with them as books that we sell. So this is a guide of amphibian or reptiles of the privately protected area Las Aropéndolas, and is sold in Amazon. So we transform the need of the students to receive help for research into their thesis. It's an academic publication, and this academic publication is transformed into books or guides that is sold to get resources for more conservation and research. So this is interesting, has been working for 2-3 years. We have 12 theses finalized, and we expect to publish next year, during this year, some guides, some books related to birds, and also it helped us to identify biodiversity resources that can be used as for biocommerce. And talking about biocommerce, this is the example of Mariposario Cerro La Vieja. It's a butterfly farm located into these two voluntary conservation efforts. And we started the same way. We developed a research identifying the species of butterflies present in this area. Then during 3 years, we developed all the knowledge needed to reproduce these species in captivity and breed them. And now we can commercialize. We're exporting butterfly pupa to Turkey. And with this exportation of pupa, we helps the protection of the lands, and also incentivize the conservation in the community. There's ladies, young women that from the area that we train them in how to reproduce butterflies. They not only work for the butterfly farm, but they own their own small butterfly farms. And all together export, and the Cerro La Vieja butterfly farm is a exporter company for these, and it not only helps to finance the conservation, but also helps to change the mind of the people related with nature. So this is our examples. This is what happening, a briefing of what is happening in Panama. And that's all. Thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Samuel. One never stops to learn and be amazed by the things and experiences from other countries. So thank you very much for your presentation. Well, our next guest is Javier Beltran. He's a conservation biologist, passionate about nature, working to harmonize conservation and agricultural production in functional landscapes. He has been involved in private land conservation since the early 90s, with the belief that landowners have a key role to play in restoring and preserving nature and associated environmental services, while also gaining benefits of this contribution. He currently serves as Conservation Director of the Nature Conservancy in Argentina, an organization for which he has worked since 2008. So Javier, you have the floor.
Gracias, Hernan. Thank you very much. Hi, everybody. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you are. Well, first of all, I would like to express my sympathy with Claudia Viegas, who is indicating the dramatic situation that is actually happening in places of Brazil because of the flooding. So, well, I hope these conditions improve soon and definitively. Basically, my presentation is going to basically touch a little bit some of things that Samuel has just mentioned. I will share a presentation right now. Let me know if you can see it. I need to hold on, please. Okay, the idea here is basically show some facts and figures of what is actually happening in terms of private land conservation in Argentina, and use a real case example of a place where we are actually working, the TNC is working, is the Gran Chaco, South American Gran Chaco, as an example of what the potentials are of enhancing enhancing overall protection with an enhanced participation of the private sector, if and only if the right incentives are in place. So basically in Argentina, although some of the things that Samuel mentioned are applicable here, voluntary land conservation today is largely altruistic, basically. It's coming from the willingness of landowners to dedicate part of their land or the entirety of their lands to biodiversity conservation, nature conservation, without requesting any additional support from anybody, basically. This is not 100%, but if you ask, probably a large proportion is actually taking place in this way. According to the Red Argentina Reservas Naturales Privadas, this is a survey of 2022, there are around 350 private nature reserves in the country, totaling 1 million hectares of land and water protected, which roughly is equivalent to less than 1% of the total area protected in the country. This is a tiny contribution, considering that between 70 and 90% of the land belong to the private sector, depends on the jurisdiction, but this is the case for a large part of Argentina. However, in spite of the situation, we believe, and I do believe, that a significant progress could be made if the right incentives are in place, as I already mentioned at the beginning of the presentation. And I will use the South American Gran Chaco as a real case or real life example. If you see in the screen that I hope it's orange, but I see the orange patch in the map is the South American Gran Chaco. Is the second standing forest biome after the Amazon, 100 million hectares in total, around 62 million hectares are in Argentina. This biome has a large natural and cultural diversity. It's a center of endemism for example, peccaries and armadillos. 90% of the fish families in Argentina live in the Gran Chaco. It's a place that is key for climate regulation and biodiversity connectivity. And last but not least, has gradually been transforming a global food basket, where Argentina is sourcing crops, beef, and some specialties to local and global markets. The ecosystem diversity in the Gran Chaco is large, about 46.2 million hectares of land is still native ecosystems, from which about 45%, 27.3 million are forests. Then we have grasslands and savannas and wetlands. The Argentina, being basically mainly a forest biome, and being also a place from where agriculture and ranching have taken place in the last 20, 30 years. This is an area where what we call our forest code, that is mandated by the Native Forest Law, has a very big importance. This law, this forest code, which is applicable to all the country, but in the Gran Chaco, you can see here how it's distributed in the Gran Chaco, defines 3 categories of forest. Category 1 appears in red. I hope again that you can see that in the screen. These forests cannot be changed because are the category with the highest conservation conditions. They basically receive a de facto protection, but with very little retribution for those who have red forests in their land. Category 2, yellow forests. Some forest management is allowed. It's about almost 20 million hectares, and there are opportunities for improved forest management. And category 3, which are the green forests, the change is allowed. You can change it, but first you need to approve a plan de conservación de cambio de uso del suelo, land use change plan. There are opportunities there for avoided deforestation. So basically what I'm trying to show you here is that both while red forests are preserved, de facto preserved, yellow and green forests can host a number of protection activities. Some already exist, but some others need to have some additional impulse from other activities, some of which have already been mentioned by Samuel in his presentation, but hopefully some additional support from innovative finance. You can see here roughly how the land cover is distributed in the Gran Chaco, and you could also see here what are the main land systems in the Gran Chaco, from industrial annual cropping to community conservation. The main threat to which this land cover is exposed, habitat loss in the first part and habitat degradation in the other part. And basically, the main strategies that we can use here in order to ensure that a large proportion of the native forest in the Gran Chaco can be maintained, even holding or hosting sustainable agriculture or other type of land use. As you can see here, protection is in the middle. But in order to avoid habitat loss, you could basically try to use the carbon markets, regenerative agriculture and restoration, and innovative finance, protection, durable freshwater protection, private protection, public protection, and enable forest-based regenerative economies in those areas in which the forest management can be carried out. Here you can see an example of the landscape seen from above. You could see a combination of land uses and land types, from strict protection to regenerative agriculture to the use of other mechanisms to finance activities of protection in private land. What I'm showing here is that actual protection exists de facto, depending on the forest, but also a number of land uses and sustainable uses can also be implemented in order to combine them with durable protection. My last slide is after showing what is the situation of the landscape and the application of the forest law in the country. Some of the key questions in order to see how to scale protection if the right incentives are put in place. For example, what would it be the reasonable boundary to be crossed by landowners for whom altruism is not enough? This is the kind of question that landowners in the region always face when we talk about protection, we talk about regenerative land use, we talk about regenerative agriculture or restoration or other activities. What would be the trade-off for the lost use value in exchange for protecting natural diversity in a formal, durable, and efficient way? What degree of formal protection would they be willing to accept in exchange for incentives? Again, when we talk about protection, when we talk about private protection, we are talking ideally to a protection that is durable, that can be sustained through time, and that can be tracked and monitored and being as effective as it was proposed in the first place. From where a reliable source of financial resources could come, and what are the policy conditions that would enable the growing private participation in land conservation actions. And these two are the key questions, the most relevant key question in a country like Argentina that has been facing economic crisis, almost chronic economic crisis. From where a landowner willing to dedicate their land, his or her land, to land protection would obtain the additional resources in order to ensure that key elements are maintained, key biodiversity elements are maintained through times, particularly those that have the chance of changing the land use from forest to something else. We believe that, and we are working towards implementing this kind of approaches in the Gran Chaco, and we believe that we can at least help to maintain between 30 or 40% of what we call the green forest, using the right incentives and using the right mechanism. I will stop here. This is what I can show you right now, and I will be open to questions in the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Javier. Those last questions are critical and key questions for any economic and social context in Latin America or worldwide.
I need to hold on. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Javier. So our next guest is Juan Celada. He is the technical director of the Association of Private Natural Reserves of Guatemala. Juan Celada is replacing Claudia Garcia, who is the executive director of the association, but who had family problems. Maybe she will assist at the end in the questions and answer section of this webinar. But so Juan Celada is presenting today. Thank you, Juan. And he's a biologist with experience in project management and implementation of strategies for conservation and sustainable management of biodiversity in Guatemala, and linked for many years to the Association of Private Natural Reserves. So Juan Celada, you have the floor. And Juan Celada, I think is, are you presenting in Spanish, Juan?
Yes, right. I will present in Spanish.
So Juan is going to present in Spanish. I can remember you that you have the Spanish-English translation in this webinar. Okay, gracias, Juan.
Thank you. Good morning, Hernan. I will share my screen right now. As others were sharing, I am here in representation of Claudia Garcia. She is the director of this institution in Guatemala. She has some personal issues. A family member has some health issues, so she can't be here right now. But I am in communication with her if one of the questions we need, for one of the questions we might need her intervention. But we will begin then with this intervention. With this presentation, we will share a little bit the experiences that we have in Guatemala in subjects about voluntary cooperation and in financial sustainability, in the conservation of private land, which we include, whether that be individual or a community. We recognize the communities in Guatemala. Several communities have the possibility to have the ownership of the land, and in many ways they also have their own take on economic sustainability. So everyone can know a little bit of our organization. We are a non-governmental institution. We help the natural reserves, which is a private section in Guatemala that's recognized in Guatemala legally, and in which landowners have the opportunity, individuals or communities, as I mentioned, and they have the opportunity to subscribe their lands within a project of protected lands. And this falls between protected areas and lands of national interest, but the landowners sustain their right to the land, and that is also reversible, so they have many rights within their lands. These natural reservations have local land organization, so you can kind of get a little bit of context of sustainability, and this is something that we call non-regional or regional nodes. Regional nodes, which is a way to provide a local power to different areas of the country, and they work as sort of work tables, a work group, different institutions that are joined together within a region, where they might have specific challenges. And so then we have solutions and planning to acknowledge those challenges, and also the strategy of biological biological brokers, and they handle larger groups of lands that are connected. So for example, in the map that you can see right here on your right side, you can see a map of what we call the ILCN node, which is a region where we have the Nontliclan, which is what we see here in blue, and what you see here, all of these numbered sections are different natural reservations. They are private or for a community, and they belong to that region, and we try to have them in connection to form a sort of network to facilitate communication and have those brokers. We currently have 15 nodes on a national level. It's a constant work in process, and those different brokers and those work groups, when we talk about different environmental challenges, and also to link different even commercial markets, to link together different products. And in these natural private reservation, we can connect these different products and then provide a more wider market for higher success rate. So these are the nodes that I mentioned. Currently, we have 137 private national reservations that are associated. And then within the area context, we have over 102,000 hectares. And we can have a context here of the type of model of that conservation that we can find within those nodes. We have the private natural reservations. We find it important to present this information. And then also we have several natural reservations, but then also within that context, I really don't have that much information. There's more diversity than I have stipulated here. We also have The private community, which is the second one, and then that's broken out into different types of associations. We have, for example, the neighborhood association, which is in urban areas where the neighbors manage the area that borders with them and what they live in. That's more of a municipality management, but they are also very much involved. Then we have an association where those owners are landowners, where those neighbors are landowners. And then we also have a council of communities for development, different corporations, and these community associations. The third point there, also manage different conservation. And then that community associations, which is linked to different people. They also have territories that they can manage with conservation in mind. And then we also have different associations of women or of indigenous people. We have associations that are linked to tourism, and they also have the property. They are owners of a different property. And then also the Guatemala legislation opened about 5 years ago. They opened a new modality that was to link the government institution in charge of conservation and link that to different areas for private management, and try and sign agreements of shared management. So those agreements don't actually go into the Guatemala system, but there is an alliance between different protective and sustainable protection for the natural environment, and they do receive some support, whether that be national or international, to fortify the different conservation efforts. We have different natural reservations within the municipality and also within the central government. And the way that that is managed is very much the same as how a private landowner would. They have their own agreements, their own way of managing that, but they can also be linked to the national conservation efforts. And then we also have some natural reservations that are linked to different schools. So a natural reserve that is linked to schools. And really entering the subject, what experiences do we have in Guatemala regarding the sustainability, financial sustainability, and different strategies, how they have been able to lead their efforts. And we have 3 experiences here that we would like to share. The first one is agriculture and cattle raising linked to conservation. We also have ecotourism, which is sustainable tourism. That has also been very important in several of our natural reserves. And then for forest incentives, with relation to agriculture, we have a diverse model of different types of modalities and different approaches, but they do share one common strategy, which is most of them, maybe 90%, are areas that are not exclusive to conservation, but they are areas that they always have some sort of activity linked to it, most likely an agricultural activity in their territory, and that really helps to keep afloat different efforts related to the conservation in that same area. The natural reserve isn't considered only that specific area, but we see it as in a more of a landscape, and the production portion of the property is also conserved part of that natural reserve. So we also try to help that area that also has some sort of production activity. We try to support that and help that support the conservation efforts within the protected area. So we basically look to the productive portion of the land to kind of be a gateway that can use some sort of species of fauna. And that is why one of the main portions of the land is different agroforest systems, especially for the coffee. So we have a coffee crop under a shadow, an area that has a lot of shadow, and that's quite diverse. That shadow is produced by different trees that are protected, but that shadow is necessary for the habitat for different species and for the coffee itself. All of this was presented a bit before by one of the other presenters. This requires a planning, and it's important to diagnose which area is most important to be completely conserved and protected, and then there are other areas that can kind of be worked around and managed for this means to help with crops. In Guatemala, there's also a lot of experiences with sustained development for different crops and for different products within that same forest. And there are different products that we could, Juan, I'm sorry, to move a little bit forward because we don't actually have a lot of time. Okay, yes, I'm sorry. All right, I'll move a little quicker. We have certifications that are also important to help them receive a benefit for these products. If maybe they have a certification, that can also be beneficial in their market. And we also have the extraction of some species. We have what is shown in the image, a sort of a palm leaf. We have rum, different artisanal rum, and some other products that are being produced in these reserves. With sustainable tourism, we have different areas within. One of the main things that are promoted is the evaluation of the potential for tourism. And within that evaluation, we can understand where the forest needs improvements. And within the tourism, we also see the importance of strategic alliances and local work groups for that coordination, involving different community members, hotels, different cultural groups. And we can see here one of these work groups where the reserve found that support, and that also helped to provide sustainability for their different entrepreneurships or different projects. And here we see the different forest incentives and compensation for environmental services. We have a law here that it's called Pro Bosque, Pro Forest, and that has a budget of 44 million And that was in 2024, and that's a budget that was also helped for reforestation and tries to really enhance different forest efforts for conservation. And now we also have a program that is that looks to capture carbon, and right now that has a lot of money that has been approved to it, as we can see in the graph. And we also have some example of different rates, different modalities, and how much the incentive is, and that's per hectare. So you can see for natural forest, that's $102 per hectare, and that's quite low. That's per year, but it has been complementary for different conservation efforts. And to finalize, something that we see has a priority to reach this sustainability is to look into those market analysis, to impulse that through different value chains and marketing. Planning is key. Not to depend for the incentives, just kind of leave that as something that's complementary, because we can't use that as our own strategy, as our only strategy, that support from the government, because it wouldn't be enough. But we need to look for some other strategies to help in sustainability that comes from the area itself. And then finally, those strategic alliances and commercial alliances are key. So that is what I have to share. I thank you for your time, and I know we will speak again in the questions. Thank you, Juan, and please give our greetings and our love to Claudia, and for her hardship, for her family hardship at the moment. Yes, thank you.
Our next guest is Roberto Peralta. Roberto is a lawyer from the University of Chile and admitted to practice in the state of New York since 2000. He has postgraduate studies from the University of California and Harvard University. In Chile, he has been an undergraduate and graduate professor at important universities. Throughout his career, he has worked in prestigious law firms and companies, and from 2018 to the present, he manages his own firm. Roberto had a leading role in the drafting of the law that created the Derecho Real de Conservación, a key tool to ensure conservation on private lands, and more recently in the approval of the new law on philanthropic donations, which allowed these to be expanded to donations for environmental and conservation purposes. Roberto has been a long friend of the International Land Conservation Network, and so Roberto, very welcome, and you have the floor, and he will be our last panelist.
Oh, thank you, Hernan. Thank you very much. And I see also that we have a lot of friends here in the audience, so I'm very happy to be here. Well, I'm going to make. Well, since I'm a lawyer, unfortunately, I'm not a biologist. My presentation probably is not going to be as beautiful and nice as the previous presentations, which were great. I really enjoyed them. And I'm going to talk about the problems we normally face when we try to finance and have a sustainable financing of conservation. And this is just basically based on my experience in dealing with difficult, some more or less successful conservation projects, all of them in Chile. Since we need to move ahead. Before talking about conservation sustainability, sometimes we always think of we need to do conservation. We need to have private conservation because national parks are not enough, especially in Chile, in the Mediterranean ecosystem, which is mostly a privately owned area where we have approximately 1% only of protected areas and where conservation is mostly needed. And we always talk a lot about what we need to do, but then sometimes we think, well, how can we get the financing and the opportunities for setting up and building a financing model that would allow us to have some sustainable financing and achieve those goals. I always remember we've learned a lot with our good friend Jim Levitt about the conservation finance and this different sets of layers that we can find for financing conservation. But I would like to put it in another way. Before thinking about what we need to do and the money we need to spend, we've seen in the previous presentations that the budget that is needed or that we consider may be needed per hectare in different areas could be a certain figure, but then we never get the figure we really need to get to those goals. So the question is, well, why don't we think it differently? So then we may find with a different mindset some other opportunities, or probably just seeing things we always see in a different way may help us to find a model or a better model that we're using now, that the one we're using now, to find sustainability for private conservation. And the first question we need to think about is, well, it's very obvious anyways, but what is our conservation purpose? Because of course, conservation is an endless need, but what we value as a conservation purpose and we want to achieve, then what stakeholders would be involved in achieving that conservation purpose? Because we need people to do conservation. It's not just our own perception or what we want, but what stakeholders will be bound, will be committed to achieve that conservation purpose. And then what conservation values can we deliver in that conservation project with the purpose we have set? And who may be willing to pay for it? Because if there's a value, it means that we should be able to find someone, philanthropist, government, local communities, crowdfunding, whatever, willing to pay for it. And then we set up a budget and a finance model. But I believe that the first 4 questions are key, because if we don't relate all these 4 elements, then setting conservation targets and financing model, according to my experience, will not work. So this guy in the picture, probably someone know him. I always use him as an example. He's Willie Sutton. He was a famous bank robber. And once he was interviewed, and the journalist asked him why he robbed banks. And his answer was very obvious, because that's where the money is. So probably we need to think in a similar way, but not to, we don't need to rob banks anyways. But well, where is the money for achieving the purpose, where we have committed stakeholders, where we have identified the conservation values that are worth achieving, where we believe there's people willing to pay for it? Well, then we have the budget and the model, and then, well, who's willing to pay for it? And according to my experience, and we should be aware of this, the first and most important is philanthropy, by far. And even if in the past, probably governments were relevant when they created national parks, at least in Chile, public funding is almost nothing. And I don't expect that may change in the near future. So most of the financing, what we've seen in Chile, is philanthropy. So that's a big, and philanthropy, at least in our country, has grown significantly. And the interest, so there we go to the who's willing to pay for it. The interest for conservation is also growing significantly. And also we have a good news that after a long work, we managed to have two sets of legislation which are key. One, as Hernan mentioned, is DRC, Derecho Real de Conservación, which is the equivalent in Chile for the conservation easement, and also tax incentives for two things, which are very important. One is for donating money, because someone may think, well, if you want to do conservation, and some politicians always told us, no, why you need tax incentives? If you want to do good, just do good with your own money. Don't use the government's money to do that. But the problem in Chile, and probably similar in other countries, is that it's not just that you want the government to give you some incentive to do good for the conservation. The problem is that when you withdraw money where you have it invested, you can end up paying almost 75% in taxes in a set of taxes that apply. So we needed the tax incentives mostly to allow that money to go out from where it's been saved by the people that can do philanthropy. And this has been a major breakthrough in the last couple of years. And now we have the opportunity, and it's happening. I've seen the conservation organizations having increased the amount of donation thanks to this possibility, because there was a lot of money that was just stuck and that couldn't flow to do conservation, where you had philanthropists willing to do conservation, but they didn't have the opportunity to do that. So philanthropy, yes, it's an opportunity, but you need the tools to allow philanthropy to happen. So, and it took us in Chile. I remember we started with our dear friend who's here in the audience, Henry Tepper. He traveled to Chile. He taught us about how in the United States you set up this structure of conservation easements and incentives for conservation easements, and then how in the 80s in the United States private conservation just skyrocketed. And we're just starting to have this in Chile. We do have now the conservation easement, DRC, and we do have the tax incentive first for the grants, donations in money, and also we're just finalizing the specific regulation to make it certain from a legal perspective, but we're finalizing the specific regulation where you can also donate the development rights, or you can donate the conservation easement, or DRC. This means that many of you probably know this, but just for the sake of everyone who's listening, this means that if you set up, if a private owner sets up a conservation easement or a derecho real de conservación, which means that he will no longer develop that land in a way that would prejudice conservation values, then there's a decrease in the value of that property from a commercial perspective. For example, if it's native forest, if you don't log that forest, if you cannot log that forest, well, there's an economic activity, that there's a value that you will not be able to grasp, and that loss of economic value or commercial value then can be deducted from the tax you have to pay. So this is very interesting and very important, especially when we get to the third opportunity for conservation finance, which is ESG, which means companies and businesses. Because, for example, forestry companies, which are very big and important in Chile, they now have an opportunity to spare the most valuable land they have with native forest and not log it. And then that may also be a tax deductible. That reduction of value can be tax deductible, which gives the possibility and incentive to further more conservation. But then philanthropy, well, this is in the case of the forestry company, it's not philanthropy, it's ESG, but philanthropy, when you can donate, for example, landowner who just wants to donate because that person loves the land and doesn't want to be destroyed and want it to be preserved. Well, also that individual can deduct from taxes the grant. But philanthropy has been, at least in Chile, and it expected to be one of the main sources and drivers of conservation, and opportunities, I think, now have increased given the new legislation. So that's That's the first key element. But to get to that point, to philanthropy, we need to find those philanthropies who they are and what they value as conservation values, so that you get them involved in, and then you need to match that with your conservation interests. So there's a first opportunity. The second opportunity, which is still to be worked out, there are some cases that I have seen, but this is also a concept that we've learned from Jim Levitt, is to go to the public funds which are attached to infrastructure, basically in the Ministry of Public Works and the regional development funds, which are mostly for infrastructure. And if we can work that out as green infrastructure, because in public policy and when the government and the governments in the different local jurisdictions.
Roberto, te puedo interrumpir para que vayamos terminando para tener tiempo para las
we need to
preguntas.
start
Tenemos 20
finishing.
minutos.
We have time for questions.
Okay, I'm
20
finishing.
minutes left. Okay, I'm finishing.
So there you have also very interesting opportunities for conservation finance and with the concept of green infrastructure. Well, ESG, I think a lot of that has been said by my predecessors. Just one small thing. I think this is an interesting opportunity. It's been very complicated with activism, with salmon farming and fish farming in Chile. That I think that marine conservation, there's a lot that can be done if there's more ability to talk between environmental groups, in conservation-minded organizations and businesses, because I believe, and I've had some discussion, there's a lot of opportunities to develop marine conservation together with the fishing companies, but also the other you mentioned, ecotourism, regenerative agriculture, is a lot of opportunities. And also there's been a very interesting limited development, because many of the very valued areas are areas that people want to enjoy in the natural state. So a limited development where you preserve the conservation values of a certain area, and you do some development, and by populating that area in a sustainable way, you protect it, and also you help spare important pieces of land for conservation. So, final question: ecosystem services. What is that? Well, I think with the 4 points above, you have the opportunity, probably selling like ecosystem services, which is something we've been hearing a lot. It's not that clear, but probably in these 4 areas, we may find that opportunities. And just to finish, this is not a beautiful landscape. This is where we can find here in Chile a big opportunity, because still cooking and heating in the south of Chile is being in these stoves that are depleting our native forests, and probably an arrangement to create the value to diminish pollution, depletion of native forests, and sustainable energy with energy companies may create high and big conservation values. So probably we need to think in a different way to find those stakeholders, to find those opportunities, and then sustainable financing can have a new phase. Well, okay, I stop here.
Okay. Thank you, Roberto. And I will pass the floor to Zach Hamel, who is a graduate student from the University of Montana and who has been working with us at the ILCN to support the Latin American network of private conservation. So, and Zach will lead the following questions and answers section. Zach?
Thank you, Hernan. And thank you all of our panelists, such wonderful presentations. I think some kind of overlying theme that I kept hearing in every one of those presentations was the importance of, and kind of the link between legal frameworks or formal recognition, maybe from governments, and receiving financial assistance. And Javier, I'm going to direct this at you to start, but maybe all of our panelists can chime in from each of their different experiences. Could you expand on the link between formal recognition and receiving financial assistance, or maybe participating in financial programs, and maybe explain some of the challenges involved in that in Argentina or elsewhere?
Thank you, Zach. This is the golden question. Of course, the public support to private land conservation in the country is minimum or negligible, I would say. Some jurisdictions give some tax deduction, property tax deductions to landowners creating private protected areas in their land. Which is too little. Now, I mentioned the red forest as a category of mandatory protection for which normally landowners don't ask. Basically, if you have red forest in your land, you have red forest in your land. You could do nothing there. So the retribution is a kind of some payments related originated in the native forest law, for which you could create a kind of forest conservation plan. Again, too little and almost and often infrequently too late. So there is a need to develop more creative mechanisms, enabling conditions that regulate payments for ecosystem services, enabling conditions for what we call the adaptation of the Derecho Real de Conservación Chileno in Argentina, the conservation easement, which we've been trying to implement a number of times here, deduct more meaningful deductions in terms of taxation. And of course, having said that, I also believe that landowners need to be creative, no? Not just expecting everything from starving public budgets, but also being open to incorporating restrictions in a way that is creative, that is incorporating aspects of restoration of intensive agriculture, intensification of agriculture, restoration of pasture land in order to, or forest land in order to recuperate a little bit of what has already been lost in El Chaco and other places, no? So at the end of the day, you are going to have a puzzle of situations, not just formal protection, but more informal, but in a way that can create corridors across landscape and would make the size of the prize more meaningful. I hope that is clear the message.
Thank you, Javier. And Samuel, I'm going to ask you the same question so that we can get just a few more perspectives across Latin America of what this looks like. Maybe from your knowledge in Panama or elsewhere, could you expand on this link between the challenges and between getting formal or legal recognition and receiving financial assistance in Panama?
Well, the first thing is that all countries must agree in how to recognize what does it mean, what are the compromises that acquire who is willing to protect the forest, and with which means the government will recognize and make that this protection of lands, voluntary conservation club, get involved into the national initiative of conservation. And after this recognition, that is not always the same in all countries. For example, in Panama, there is no recognition. There is no formal normative or regulations about privately protected areas. But this is the first step before receive some or trying to pursue some financial support, even from international organizations or philanthropists. So as in our point, we are voluntary conservation. There is no compromise, really. I can decide tomorrow to finish my compromise of protection and use my land to cut the trees and sell the wood and establish pastures lands. So there is nothing that can prohibit to me to do that, because there's not compromise. There's nothing. There's just the voluntary, the willing to protect. So I think that this is a gap. We must agree with the national authorities in a compromise, and in change. Not the main reason or the main prize we will receive is the recognition of the initiative. So in that way, we can receive help from others, because actually there is no formal social contract, let's say, on a way to the compromise, making a black and white compromise. So so I can't tell you I will protect this for forever, but there is nothing that legally is doable or give up a framework to this protection. So this is the first step. Then you can start to looking for financial support in other maybe with philanthropies, maybe with the local government, maybe with the international GNOs or local GNOs, donations, or whatever. So this is my point of view.
Thank you, Samuel. Roberto, I'm going to call on you. You expanded a little bit about the importance of philanthropy and the emerging opportunities of funding opportunities through philanthropy in Chile. Could you expand on what are the challenges in setting up the legal or maybe financial structures that would be needed to help funds from philanthropy arrive to maybe current or future private land conservation initiatives in Chile?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, the whole purpose of my presentation was that I've seen a lot of mismatch between what the people that is willing to pay for conservation want to achieve and the people who want to do conservation want to achieve. And I think the first step is try to match both things. And I would add to that, not only philanthropies, but also businesses. There's where a lot of money you can find now. ESG is becoming every day more and more important. We have a very interesting experience actually with Henry Tepper, with a big power company, where a very interesting conservation project was set up in the south. To get that to get that match, it took us almost 4 to 5 years. It was a long process, but at the end we got through. I think that process is very important. You have to really work on mindsets, because there's money that is interested in financing conservation, but you need to match both, and that requires a lot of conversation. And then I think that philanthropists and companies willing to spend money in conservation, they need to learn more about what conservation means and what it takes to do conservation, because they don't know it. So if they don't know, they need to learn. So it's part of that mismatch is also to teach them, so they will be better prepared to look for and find what they are willing to finance.
And maybe just one follow-up question to clarify. What would be the next steps needed to push for that type of influence? It sounds like political influence would be an important step to get more government representatives involved, but what do you see in Chile as being really the next step to making that happen?
Well, I think I would say that it's a very good question. Let me put it, I'm sorry, this may take a little bit more, but let me put an example. There was a very, very controversial, Hernan knows a lot about it, project called ILCN. Remember, Hernan?
Sure.
You know what ILCN meant? Well, a lot of conflicts, activism, etc. But the worst thing of all, well, the good thing it was finally it was not made, and it was a good decision for all parties, for both the energy company, because it would have been a terrible and horrible energy project in the south of Chile. But and also unprofitable, which was incredible. But The real thing I really didn't like of the whole process is that the energy company spent $300 million wasted trying to push forward a project that didn't make any sense. And that was because of the mismatch. Because activism needs to have a more open and a more open way of communicating with businesses. Because if you are able to have a better way of understanding each other, you can avoid that. And by the way, there's another project that just lost $150 million. So in Chile, at least I can say, and from what I know, $450 million just wasted in lost project because of the lack of ability of communicating, just that. So I think that what can we do? I think that we need to try to have a better alignment on all the conservation movement and trying to have a better communication with businesses and trying to achieve and reach common goals. We know there are going to be very different points of view in many things, ideology, what you think about development, etc. But probably you may find some areas of understanding, and that means that you may get, and we may find, very interesting opportunities for financing sensible and valuable conservation.
Thank you, Roberto. Y Juan.
And Juan, I will change now to Spanish. Thank you so much for your presentation. One of the things that we saw from your presentation was the importance of working in different nodes, and that has contributed to many projects. Could you share some of experiences? Something that has incremented the motivation of conservation in Guatemala? Yes, of course. Well, working in nodes has allowed us to, especially what Roberto mentioned, that communication, that fluid communication between different sectors in conservation, landowners, different local authorities, local organizations, to try and solve specific challenges. For example, in one of the nodes we worked with, different tables, work tables, and they were regional, and they were quite large. And if we're, and this was in regards to different basins, and to try to reach the resolution of some challenges that involved water that usually was contaminated water in micro basins, and sometimes that was very complicated in different instances, and trying to resolve issues, contamination issues, it's difficult if that's worked independently. And then also sometimes we see the municipalities don't have the financial means to maybe resolve this, and then also the cooperation of different organizations, private, public, and that has helped to diminish the contamination in that specific scenario. They reached an agreement also for commercial means. Sometimes we've seen this with honey. Somebody else might need specific certification to be able to reach an export. And through these nodes, we see the facility, the easiness of communication. And what I also mentioned in the communication, the landowners also are in communication with other tourism sectors to try and provide their services in better ways and try to have those tourists reach our ground. Thank you.
And so I'm just keeping an eye on our time here, realizing that
Yes.
we're edging closer. And I have one more question that I want to get across before then. This is for Samuel. For those of you who don't know, a related work that the ILCN has been engaged with, along with a very large group of organizations in Latin America, is trying to strengthen the existing private lands conservation network in Latin America, kind of a regional network. And Samuel has been very involved in that. He's contributed a lot. And it would be great to hear, Samuel, what you see as what might be the first steps of that network can take to help expand finance opportunities in Latin America for voluntary conservation.
Okay, that's a great question. I think that we need to identify or make a research along. This is a first step. All countries on all voluntary conservation initiative has find different ways to support or to finance their protection. I think that we can develop a list or yes, a list of opportunities of what each of us have been doing to finance their conservation and interchange this. So I can find new ideas in Guatemala, new ideas in Chile, Argentina, that we have never imagined before. And maybe somebody may find in our Panamanian experience some ideas. So the first step will be make a research and a publication of which are those actual working conservation of financing, conservation efforts or supports that exist already. And how we can start to interchange these ideas and share these ideas with local governments, and we can make maybe a bigger presidential congress or conference to engage authorities, environmental authorities, philanthropists, to show to the world what we are doing and looking for help. Let's say Roberto talk us about all the opportunities that exist in the business areas and philanthropies. So what if we can show a menu or a list of conservation initiatives along the Latin America that need support and are focused in some specific areas, and make a catalog of conservation initiatives across Latin America that are looking for funds, and identify business and philanthropies and funds that are looking for how to support. So maybe put together the both sides of the coin.
Yeah, it sounds like a database essentially, right? Of
yes.
Our opportunities and where
two database, a database of conservation initiative along Latin America, and a database of financial opportunities along the Latin America by country, by area. So we can start to talk each other and find a way to cooperate. Fill the gap, just fill the gap.
Thank you, Samuel. All right, Hernan, I'll leave it to you to
yes.
conclude this.
Well, we have reached the end of our webinar time. We thank the panelists for their outstanding presentations. To all those who connected, over 80 people to this webinar, and who contributed with their questions to explore alternatives available to expand conservation finance opportunities for private and civic-led conservation in Latin America and ensure their financial sustainability. Stay tuned for future webinars that we're regularly hosting, and I invite you to visit our website at landconservationnetwork.org, and see you next time. Goodbye. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.